A very good afternoon. The top business stories live from the Sky Newsroom. Vauxhall's owner to close its van-making factory in Luton, putting more than 1,100 jobs at risk. While there's only been one UK fine for evading sanctions, despite evidence of goods making their way into Russia. Plus, Trump tariffs will be getting the latest market reaction to the president-elect's trade threat to China, Mexico and Canada. Very good afternoon on this Tuesday Business Live with me, Darren McCaffrey. And we're going to start with some breaking news this afternoon, as that is that Stellantis, the owner of Vauxhall, has announced plans to shut its van-making factory in Luton, putting more than 1,100 jobs at risk. The company is now in consultation with unions and employees over the proposals, which will also see it invest £50 million into its Ellesmere Port factory. It comes as the Business Secretary Jonathan Reynolds is expected to announce a consultation on possible policy changes to switch to electric vehicles following a meeting with industry leaders today. Well, let's bring in Andy Palmer, who previously ran the Luton plant when it was producing vans for Nissan. He's now, he was a former chief executive of Aston Martin too. Andy, very good afternoon to you. This is a bitter blow.
It's dreadful news. Obviously, Luton is a famous site for producing vans. As you said, I was at Nissan actually, but we consigned manufacturing of our vans to the Luton plant. So I've had a long association with the plant, and it's dreadful to hear that it might be closed. So very bad news.
And bad news, you know the city well. Bad news for Luton. You know, vans have been made in that city for decades and decades and decades.
Yes, I mean the industry coined the term of the Luton van. It's very closely associated with what it does, and the plant has been called into question many times over that period. I know for the last 25 years there's always been that question mark over can you make it work, and it very much relied upon. For example, bringing together Vauxhall with Renault, or latterly with Stellantis, to get the volumes up. But it's unfortunate that it seems that road has come to an end.
And what is at play here? What's the thought process? What are Vauxhall effectively thinking? There's been a lot of talk about EVs, haven't there? And yes. Effectively a lack of government help.
Look, for sure, the regulations around introductions of EVs, the mandate that a certain proportion of your volume has to be EV as we move forward, 22% this year, 28% next year, that undoubtedly plays into it. But we have to put that into context. Luton exports something like 75% of its production, so it's not related to that regulation. At the moment, Luton doesn't produce any EVs, so it's not directly. It's easy. The manufacturers find it convenient to blame one particular thing, but here, in fact, is more to do, I think, with the European car industry, the problems that places like Germany are having, the pressure on the automaker in general, not just related to EVs.
And Andy, I'll get onto that in a second if I can, but let's talk about Ellesmere Port, because the idea is, I think from reading the press release this afternoon, is that they are going to try and shift some of these jobs, at least, with a bit of more extra investment into the plants in the north.
Yes, and that's obviously welcome news. It's not welcome news for the guys in Luton, but it's welcome news that the Vauxhall isn't going away, that it's doubling down. And it's making those commitments to EV as well, which is really important as we move forward. So there's a little bit bittersweet here, and it's it's good news, I guess, for Ellesmere Port, but bad news for Luton.
Let's talk about the wider car industry. You touched upon it there, didn't you, about what's happening not just here in the UK but across Europe, particularly the powerhouse of Germany. I mean, a lot of people thinking that essentially the car manufacturing business in Europe is effectively falling apart.
It does feel like that, doesn't it? What's happening is probably the biggest change in the industry since the car industry began, as we move from petrol and diesel across to EV. Some of those manufacturers have been slow to make that change, meaning they've got big capital investment programs to catch up. But it's also let in, if I may, the Chinese manufacturers. So suddenly you've got this very, very competitive, if not incentivized, industry that is eating the lunch of the traditional players. So in a market that was already tough, in a market which was transitioning to EV, you've now got these extra players making it more difficult, and it's just that much harder to make money. So that's the wider issue. You also see, for example, in Germany, the removal of the incentives for customers to buy cars at a moment, particularly EVs, at a moment when basically you've got cost of living issues. So it does feel like a lot of black swans are all coming together. Almost a flurry of them coming together, a flock of black swans, if I may, and basically the industry's suffering.
OK, Andy, really appreciate your time this afternoon. Difficult day for those workers in Luton. Andy Palmer there, thank you very much indeed for joining us. And just to say, we've heard from both the Prime Minister's spokesperson in the last hour or so on this story, saying that they've got a long-standing partnership with Stellantis and will work with all stakeholders on the proposals, and saying that they are backing the wider industry with £300 million for electric cars. And also, Jonathan Reynolds, who's the business secretary, of course, has said it is a very difficult day for Luton after, of course, Vauxhall effectively announced the shutting of that van-making factory. Let's move on now. The government's financial sanctions watchdog has admitted that it has only imposed a single fine for evasion of Russian sanctions since they were introduced some 2.5 years ago. Appearing before the Treasury Select Committee today, the Treasury's economic crime chief said that despite the imposition of the most far-reaching set of sanctions on any country, only one £15,000 fine had actually been levied. That's despite evidence uncovered by Sky News that goods such as luxury cars are still making their way into Russia.
Given the severity of the sanctions on Russia, which is, and that they happened the way they happened, would you have expected when all this started that you would have issued more fines?
I think the figure at the moment is lower than we would want, and we hope to have more cases come out that will present a more rounded, fuller picture of our enforcement action. I will certainly be very disappointed if we come back before you or another committee in a year's time and we've only got this £15,000 fine, because I think we would hope more of the caseload to have emerged and to have become public by then.
OK, let's bring in our economics and data editor, Ed Conway, who is live for us. Ed, you've been doing a deep dive into these figures. Just bring us up to date with what you found out.
It's quite striking because when you talk to policymakers, they want to reference the fact that we have got the most far-reaching set of sanctions that we've imposed on anyone. And partly it's on individuals, so Vladimir Putin and various people in the Kremlin regime. Also, it's on companies sending goods around. It's on financial sanctions. The fact that only £15,000 of fines have been imposed in financial terms is pretty striking. It's worth saying that's just the financial side. You've also got all of this trade that's flowing into other countries neighbouring Russia. And on that, let's just have a look at what the big picture is right now. This is showing you sanctioned items, dual-use items, the kinds of things we know have been found on the battlefield in Ukraine that have been used to kill people. Some of those components are made in the UK, and up until 2022, a lot of them were going towards Russia. Then, obviously, sanctions were imposed. The higher this line is, the more we are exporting towards these different countries. And then that went to zero. So a lot of people in the government would say, look, that's mission accomplished. However, when you look at the same items and how many of them, so parts for drones, radar equipment and so on, are going to Russian neighbours in the Caucasus and in Central Asia, look at this line, OK? So it's the same thing, but looking at those goods. And what you see is they jump up sharply, stuff that's going to the Russian neighbours, straight after those sanctions were imposed, OK? And what are we talking about here? The stuff that's going to the Caucasus, Central Asia, places like Kazakhstan and so on. It is things like drone parts. This is showing you the increase in the amount of this stuff going across to these regions in millions of pounds. So it's drone parts, it's telephone switching equipment, data processing machines, optical sensors. It's the kind of stuff we are finding on the battlefield. So you've got dual-use items, stuff that can be used for war. As well as that, you have luxury items which previously were going to Russia and aren't going there anymore, but might be going to the neighbours. So this is cars, luxury cars going from the UK that exports to Russia basically stop in 2022, and then suddenly there's a big increase in exports to countries like Azerbaijan and other Caucasus and Central Asia nations. So a lot of those items going to Russian neighbours instead. And it's worth saying, when you're looking at the total amounts here, yes, the amount that's going to Azerbaijan over there, that's Azerbaijan, is relatively small. OK, but do it as a percentage of the GDP in Azerbaijan. So working out the propensity, the ability of this country to afford that many cars, and you get a different picture. So this is car purchases as a percentage of GDP, just to give you a sense of whether there's an outlier here, and see if there is an outlier. That outlier is Azerbaijan. So what you're seeing here is unaccustomed increases in trade to countries in Central Asia and the Caucasus. And when you look at the kind of map of how this is happening, well, there's the UK. A lot of these cars flow across. They go to places like Azerbaijan. Sometimes they go to Georgia, sometimes Kazakhstan. And then they move within this Caucasus, Central Asia region. They go potentially to Armenia. And then sometimes they go over the border through Georgia and into Russia. And how do we know that? It's because we at Sky News not long ago actually went to the border with Georgia and showed there are Range Rovers there waiting to go across the border into Russia. So this is all happening. Final thing worth saying is there have been more fines for this kind of thing. So Trey, we don't know if they're definitely for cars, but more fines for this, but only 6 fines so far since those sanctions have been imposed. A lot of people would say that's not many.
OK, Ed, fascinating stuff and a big challenge, I think, for those in government. Thank you very much indeed, Ed Conway, our economics and data editor. We were just bringing you up to date, weren't we, just before we went to Ed, about what was happening with Vauxhall, and that Jonathan Reynolds, the business secretary, had said it had been a very difficult day for Luton following that decision to shut its van-making factory. Well, actually, he's been speaking in Parliament, the business secretary. Let's have a listen in to what he had to say.
Less than 10 days into the job when we were first told by Stellantis that the consideration to close the Luton plant was what they wanted to do. We've met many times with them since then. It's obviously something that we fought back on very heavily because of what it will mean for people in Luton. Their request was to look at some of the specific aspects, some of the flexibilities around how the ZEV mandate works. Myself and the Secretary of State for Transport were, of course, willing to have that conversation. The whole industry has concerns, as I say, because of how it's operating. We are willing and have moved further in that direction, but we were told this morning that the decision has been made. To rationalise operations at Ellesmere Port is, to be frank, a better outcome than it could have been, because Stellantis has significant overcapacity, you will know, across its European footprint, so we could have lost those 2 key lines to a different factory. The fact they're going to Ellesmere Port, and there's going to be a 50-60 million pounds, I understand, investment in the paint shop to do that. Of course, that bit is good news, but I wouldn't want to give any other impression than I believe this is a very difficult day for people in Luton, and of course the department will be giving them full support, as will all of government, in order to do everything we can to help those people in that position.
There you go. That's Jonathan Reynolds, the business secretary, speaking in Parliament in the last couple of minutes following that news that 1,100 jobs are at risk, with Vauxhall effectively closing its van-making factory in Luton. OK, you're watching Business Live here on Sky News. Coming up in just a couple of minutes, we'll be looking at how the markets are faring on this Tuesday afternoon. The FTSE is down today. All the details after this commercial break.
Migrants risk their lives climbing aboard these trains in search of a dream, the United States.
It's really dangerous. They often get robbed on this train.
They suffer a lot by police, cartels.
What happens to them next, we just don't know. Do you miss your mum?
With Trump coming to the presidency, how much longer will people be accommodated?
the journey you've been through. It's been very difficult at times. Has it been worth it?
See. This is a journey which goes by one name, the Beast.
I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
We'd been warned that we would meet people in the lowest moment of their lives.
Their story is one of fundamental American failure. Well, a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club, but I have to say there are more media here than there are supporters.
We love Trump!
I've witnessed the remarkable passion for politics here, but the anger too. This is just the audience that Joe Biden wanted.
Is this the moment to reform gun laws?
You know, it's easy to go to politics.
But it's important, it's at the heart of the issue.
For all the talk of a toned-down, humbled Trump, yes, maybe there was just a little less rhetoric, a little less divisiveness, but in the end it was the same rhythm, the same speech, the same man.
All them people that died in Russia and Ukraine, they'd still be alive today if Donald Trump was the president.
If it was my wish, have a businessman that's strong like Trump, but maybe just doesn't say as much, you know?
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there.
What we've been allowed to see over here is a humanitarian corridor.
Free wherever you get your news.
A young American medical student is making remarkable things happen.
I've seen a lot of difficult things, and honestly, it breaks my heart. These children don't deserve that.
I don't think there's a single Arab I know who isn't seriously disturbed by what's going on.
And so they gathered for this wonder of nature.
I'm very excited right now.
This is an extraordinary moment beyond anything I could have expected. Sky News, get the full story first.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
This conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Tanks, heavy vehicle.
Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
Just want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
OK, let's bring you up to date with some of the rest of the other business stories on this Tuesday afternoon. And the UK's financial watchdog, the Financial Conduct Authority, has been condemned by MPs as incompetent and dishonest. A reporting from a cross-party parliamentary group found that the body was not fit for purpose and described its leaders as opaque and unaccountable. A spokesperson for the FCA rejected the findings and said, "We have learned from historic issues and transformed as an organisation so we can deliver for consumers, the market and the wider economy." Shop inflation has risen for the first time in 17 months amid warnings that higher costs for retailers will inevitably lead to rising prices for consumers. According to the British Retail Consortium, Nielsen IQ Shop Price Index, shop prices are now 0.6% cheaper than a year ago, but there's a warning that November's figure may signal the end for falling inflation. And Halfords has urged the Chancellor for support to help offset the hit from tax rises, warning that budget measures will send its wage bill soaring by around £23 million. The retailer called on the government to help soften the impact of the increase in national insurance contributions and the minimum wage by considering overhaul the apprenticeship levy. This morning, Halfords reported that pre-tax profits fell 23.3% to £17.8 million in the 6 months to the end of September. And if you want the latest on that, and indeed any of the latest money news, you can, of course, just scan that QR code on your screen now for our money blog on the Sky News app and the Sky News website. OK, let's bring you up to date with the markets and how the prospects for a renewed Trump tariff war have played out? Well, the stocks are up in the US. You can see the Nasdaq 100 up slightly this afternoon. The markets seem to be largely taking the threat of tariffs in the stride, though Europe has closed down across the board. They're a sea of red. It's particularly taken a toll on European car makers, who, of course, aren't included thus far in what Donald Trump says he will do on day one. That was focused very much on Mexico, Canada and China. But car makers, there is concern about the impact across Europe and indeed here in the UK. The FTSE 100 down 0.4% this afternoon too. On the currencies, let's have a look at how they're doing. The pound down again. I mean, it's extraordinary when you think about it. The pound was running at 132 about a month ago. Now it's down to 125. Quite significant losses for the pound against the dollar, in part because sterling's fallen back, but also because the dollar has strengthened quite significantly. But it is down again today, virtually unchanged against the euro at €1.20. It should be noted that the Canadian dollar, for example, is down to a 4-year low against the US dollar, and the Mexican peso is also down today because of those statements from President-elect Trump. And we're going to end on, of course, the price of oil, which has been hovering around $73, $74 a barrel. It's up 0.51% this afternoon. Cool. Well, let's get the very latest on this with Janet Mui. She is head of market analysts at Brewin Dolphin and joins us now. Janet, very good afternoon to you. We have to talk, of course, about this trade war that we may well see, certainly the imposition of tariffs. What impact has it had in the US? We saw the Nasdaq up this afternoon.
Hey, good afternoon. Thanks for having me. I think what we saw in markets today is really a continuation of what we have seen since the election, which is the US markets continue to do well, whereas the European markets continue to go down because of tariff threats. I think the reason why the US markets is doing okay is because, well, ultimately the US economy is still very good. We just got US consumer confidence data, which is at the highest level in a year. And markets are still very much enthusiastic about these pro-growth measures and deregulation that will benefit US domestic companies and economy. Whereas we see an escalation right yesterday when Trump announced potentially adding more tariffs on China, Mexico, and Canada. So it is just, investors thinking there are signs of already the start of flames of trade war going on there. So European companies are more at risk to trade tariffs compared to, say, the US, which is more insulated. That's why we have been seeing such a divergence in the asset class performance between the two regions.
Yeah, and particularly, Janet, when it comes here in Europe to car manufacturers who, they haven't been hit with tariffs yet, but there's real concern that they could be a target further down the line.
Yeah, first of all, even before the tariffs, European car companies are already struggling. In fact, actually, the whole European economy, particularly Germany, has been suffering. Industrial production in the region has been in contraction for pretty much the past 2 years. And the recent business surveys on industrial production and manufacturing went deeper into contraction. So the starting point is already quite bad. The auto sector in Europe is facing huge competition from Chinese EV. They could potentially be fighting another trade war with China when they're imposing sanctions on Chinese EVs. So really lots of headwinds coming from all directions. And we're not even talking about the start of more tariffs from the US. So I guess investors are just really concerned about the outlook from there.
Yeah, there is a possibility that, I know we're geographically in some ways, but the middle between America and China, but, that Europe might just get squeezed by this trade war at a time in which, European economies, particularly Germany's, is barely growing, if at all.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what we saw from the latest economic data is just really staggering. We continue to see U.S. business surveys accelerating in the services sector, whereas in the euro area, even the services sector now has been dragged down to contraction level. Manufacturing has been down for a bit, but even services sector, which has been resilient, is also down. Yeah. And as you say, it's really stuck in the middle because we have to understand, for example, countries like Germany, highly exposed to the consumers in China, countries like France, the luxury discretionary spending sector highly exposed to Chinese consumers. So you're fighting against a weakening Chinese economy, which, by the way, China is being slapped with more tariffs by the US, which is a headwind to Chinese growth. At the same time, potentially more tariff on Europe, and it's just various headwinds from all sides.
Indeed. Just very finally, Jenna, one of those, of course, is let's look at the currencies. I mean, sterling's taken a real hammering against the dollar over the last month or so. It's down now to 125.
Yeah, I think generally it's really a matter of dollar strength, as you mentioned. Is really most currencies are down versus the dollar. I think for sterling, the reason is because sterling actually had a pretty good run before the election, and people were actually upbeat about the Labour government. But then I think a lot of investors were just a bit concerned about the outlook of the UK economy, given that businesses are going to pay higher taxes, and just really assessment that the UK economy may have a bit more trouble going forward.
OK, great analysis, as always, on the markets and the currencies on this Tuesday afternoon. Janet Mui, thank you so much indeed for joining us. Thank you. OK, well, that is it for me on Business Live for today. I'm back, of course, tomorrow at 11:30 tomorrow morning. Do join me for that. Coming up next, it's Mark Austin with the News Hour, the latest on possible ceasefire in the Middle East. See you tomorrow.